Have you ever found yourself doing something you swore you wouldn't? Or, feeling a particular way, almost like you're operating on autopilot. Imagine this, a specific jingle from an old commercial, maybe, and boom, you instantly crave a certain sugary drink, even if you're not thirsty. Or maybe walking into a particular room fills you with this unexpected wave of nostalgia or even anxiety before you even consciously process why. These aren't just random quirks of your brain. They're deeply ingrained patterns, powerful connections forged deep down. Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're embarking on a fascinating and I think incredibly practical journey. We're diving deep into a scientific principle that might sound, well, kind of ancient from the early 20th century. Ivan Pavlov's dogs. But just trust me, this isn't just about salivating canines and ringing bells in some, dusty old lab. We're going to explore how the profound science of classical conditioning, first meticulously documented by Pavlov, directly explains why our modern brains create these powerful, often unconscious associations between specific cues, what we're going to call your personal bells, and your cravings, your automatic reactions, or even your deepest emotional responses. Our mission for this deep dive is basically to give you a shortcut to understanding those hidden levers that control so much of your daily behavior, especially those unwanted ones.
What's truly fascinating here and what makes these, century-old experiments so enduringly relevant today is how precisely they reveal the universal blueprint for how we learn. We'll trace that scientific journey from Pavlov's pioneering laboratory observations, which quantified these learned associations with remarkable precision, all the way to cutting-edge behavioral insights from modern psychology and neuroscience. Our goal isn't just to teach you the history, it's to equip you with the knowledge to not only clearly identify these powerful personal bells in your own life, those unique triggers that set off a chain reaction of desire or emotion, but crucially, to understand and apply the science of how to decondition yourself. This means actively weakening those old, often unhelpful connections and basically extinguishing the power of your unwanted triggers. It's about more than just insight. It's about practical, actionable application for gaining real control.
Exactly. And that's the exciting part, right? This isn't just some academic exercise. It's about empowering you to gain real, tangible control over those automatic responses that so often feel entirely outside your command. We're talking about taking back the reins of your own reactions. Maybe it's finally breaking a persistent bad habit, learning to manage an unexpected surge of anxiety, or just understanding why you feel compelled to do certain things even when you logically know they aren't serving you. Get ready for some genuine aha moments, I think, that will fundamentally change how you view and interact with your own behavior and the world around you. So let's begin our journey by literally traveling back in time, all the way to the early 1900s, to the laboratory of the pioneering Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov. Most people have at least a vague notion of his famous dogs, right? But the real magic, the lasting insight, comes from understanding the elegant simplicity yet profound implications of his groundbreaking experiments. At its core, classical conditioning is this fundamental process where your brain learns to link two things together that weren't originally connected. A neutral stimulus, something that initially means nothing to you, elicits no particular response, becomes so strongly associated with a naturally occurring stimulus that it eventually, on its own, comes to evoke a conditioned response. It's a foundational way our brains learn, adapt, and, well, build expectations about the world. Let's visualize this classic setup. Imagine a dog secured in a harness with its salivation meticulously measured. When Pavlov presented this dog with food, like a bowl of meat powder, what happened?
Well, naturally, instinctively, the dog would salivate.
Right. That food is what we call the unconditioned stimulus, UCS, because it naturally, unconditionally causes salivation without any prior learning. And the salivation itself, that automatic biological reaction, that's the unconditioned response, UCR. Now, before any conditioning, Pavlov would introduce a neutral stimulus, something like ringing a bell or ticking a metronome. When that bell rang, what did the dog do?
Probably perked its ears, maybe looked around, but it certainly didn't salivate in anticipation of food. The bell was, at this point, just a neutral sound, neutral stimulus.
No. Yeah. But then Pavlov began this systematic pairing. He would ring the bell and immediately afterward present the food. Bell, then food, bell, then food, repeated again and again over many trials.
And what he meticulously observed, documenting every detail, was that after these repeated pairings, the dog started to form an association. The bell was no longer just a neutral sound, it became a reliable predictor of food. Eventually, the bell alone, without any food present, would cause the dog to salivate. At this pivotal moment, the bell had transformed from a neutral stimulus to a conditioned stimulus, CS, because it had been conditioned to evoke a response. And the salivation to the bell alone, that became the conditioned response, CR. It was a learned reaction entirely distinct from the innate salivation to food, and it demonstrated the brain's incredible capacity to form predictive associations. What's often overlooked, in the simplified anecdotes of Pavlov's dogs, and what truly makes his work foundational, is the sheer scientific rigor and breadth he applied. His research extended far beyond just bells. He experimented with a diverse array of stimuli to see how they could be conditioned, from electric light and varying tones, strong or weak, to buzzers and even tactile stimulation of the dog's skin. These were all carefully paired with unconditioned stimuli, not just food, but sometimes even mild acid to elicit different physiological responses, like defensive salivation. He wasn't simply observing, he was quantifying everything with remarkable precision. His lab kept precise records, measuring salivary secretion in drops during 20 seconds and noting motor reaction and general behavior. This wasn't guesswork, it was a systematic, quantitative exploration of how learning happened at a physiological level.
That level of methodical detail really sets the stage for understanding how our brains work, doesn't it? It's not just an idea, it's based on measurable, observable responses.
Precisely, and Pavlov delved even deeper into the brain's incredible plasticity, describing what he termed the mosaic of functions. He discovered that even a single point in the cerebral cortex wasn't fixed in its response. Depending on the specific experimental conditions, that same neural pathway could originate either excitation leading to a response or inhibition suppressing a response. This was a profound early insight, demonstrating that the brain isn't just forming simple, rigid, if X then Y connections. It's a dynamic, adaptable system, constantly learning not only to respond but also to not respond, based on the context and learned associations. This foundational understanding of the brain's capacity for both excitation and inhibition is crucial because it underpins much of what we'll discuss about deconditioning, about literally rewiring our brains to break old patterns. He could even discern different types of nervous systems in his dogs based on their adaptability and dominant tendencies for excitation or inhibition, hinting at individual differences in how we learn and respond to our environment.
That's truly incredible detail, really showing the depth of his work. And it really brings us to the crux of why this matters to you today. It's not just about dogs in a lab and a simple bell, is it? Our brains, your brain, are constantly making these kinds of associations, forming these bells and salivations throughout your daily life, often without you even realizing it. Your brain is a master at linking cues to responses, building this vast, often unconscious network of conditioned behaviors, desires, and emotional states that can feel completely automatic. Here's where it gets really interesting, because understanding this helps us gain leverage over those automatic behaviors.
Indeed, Pavlov's principles manifest as incredibly powerful triggers in our daily lives, forming associations that are often unconscious, deeply ingrained, and profoundly influential. Think of it this way. Your entire environment, whether it's your physical surroundings, your social interactions, or even your internal states, acts as a constant stream of cues, subtly conditioning your responses moment by moment. James Clear, in his best-selling book Atomic Habits, puts it perfectly. Every habit is initiated by a cue, but it's more nuanced than just a single trigger. Over time, Clear explains, habits aren't just linked to an isolated sound or sight, they become associated with the entire context surrounding the behavior.
A whole context.
Yes, the whole thing. That means the time of day, the specific room you're in, the people you're with, even the sounds or smells. All of these elements can become part of that trigger. The entire environment, the context, effectively becomes the cue. Clear emphasizes that a stable, predictable environment with clear purpose allows positive habits to form easily. Conversely, he notes that small changes in context can lead to large changes in behavior over time, highlighting just how intertwined our actions are with our surroundings. So if you're struggling to break a habit or change a reaction, often the first and most powerful step isn't just willpower, it's changing the stage on which that habit or reaction usually plays out.
And it goes even deeper than just our visible habits, doesn't it? As we learn from sources like 5 Psychological Truths, up to 90% of our daily behavior is actually automatic, driven by habit loops, scripts, and environmental cues. This means that much of what you do, how you react, and even how you feel is fundamentally shaped by these ingrained associations, rather than purely by conscious choice. That same source has a powerful and frankly quite sobering line. You do not rise to the level of your intentions. You fall to the level of your conditioning. It truly underscores the immense, often invisible power of these unconscious associations in shaping our daily reality. We might intend to eat healthier or be more patient or procrastinate less, but our conditioning, our personal bells, can easily lead us down a different, well-worn path, overriding our conscious intentions.
That's a critical point because this conditioning isn't limited to simple behaviors. It extends profoundly into our emotional and relational lives, often in ways that can feel, well, overwhelming. Bessel van der Kolk, in The Body Keeps the Score, explores how traumatic memories are often precipitated by specific triggers. These aren't just vague recollections, they can be vivid sensory fragments, an image, a sound, a smell, a specific internal bodily sensation, or a feeling that intrude into the present, causing the person to literally relive the traumatic event. He recounts chilling examples like a patient named Julian whose sudden uncontrollable rage was triggered by specific, seemingly innocuous remarks from his girlfriend. Or Irene, who found herself compelled to reenact aspects of her traumatic story when confronted with certain cues, even without conscious awareness of the connection to the original trauma. In these cases, the brain's attempt to protect itself by secreting stress hormones and initiating defensive movements gets replayed automatically as a conditioned response to a specific cue. The body remembers, even when the conscious mind struggles to connect the dots.
Wow, the body remembers. That's powerful.
It is, and similarly, in the realm of relationships, as detailed and attached by Amir Levine and Rachel Heller, our attachment systems are highly susceptible to these conditioned triggers. For individuals with an anxious attachment style, for example, they often have what the authors describe as a super-sensitive attachment system. This means they possess a unique ability to sense when their relationship is threatened, or when their partner might be pulling away. Even a slight hint that something may be wrong, a subtle change in tone of voice, a delayed text message, a partner's distracted gaze, can instantly activate the system, leading to intense feelings of anxiety, insecurity, and even obsessiveness.
So they're picking up on tiny cues.
Exactly. They pick up on subtle cues that others might completely miss because their brains have been conditioned to associate these cues with potential threat or abandonment in past relationships. Once activated, their system demands reassurance before it can calm down. This powerfully demonstrates how deep-seated relational patterns are, in essence, conditioned emotional responses, triggered by cues that have been associated with safety or threat. The good news, however, is that while these attachment styles are stable, they're also plastic, meaning they can change through new conditioning.
So it's clear then that these personal bells are often hidden in plain sight, interwoven into the very fabric of our daily routines, or deeply embedded in our emotional responses. They're not always obvious, and that's the challenge, and also the opportunity, I guess. They can be that specific social media app icon on your phone that makes you instinctively reach for it to scroll, even if you're busy. Or that particular tone of voice from a loved one that instantly puts you on the defensive. Or even the specific scent of a food that immediately triggers intense cravings you thought you'd overcome. That's your brain, ringing its bell, and you're responding, often without conscious thought, propelled by these deep-seated associations. So here's an activity for you, our listener, to try over the next day or two, perhaps even longer. Become a detective of your own internal landscape. Don't judge, just observe. What are your daily environments, the specific people you interact with, the particular apps you open, or even internal feelings like boredom, stress, excitement, or feeling of overwhelm that reliably precede certain unwanted behaviors or emotional states? That sudden urge to procrastinate when you open your laptop to work on a difficult task. That feeling of inadequacy when you see a specific type of social media post. That knot in your stomach when a particular sensitive topic comes up in conversation. That, right there, is your bell. Begin to identify them, to name them, because recognition is the very first and most crucial step toward intentional change. Pay attention to the context, the who, what, when, and where, that consistently triggers your reactions.
This brings us to the most crucial and empowering part of our deep dive, the science of silence, or maybe more accurately, the science of deconditioning. Just as these powerful connections are formed, sometimes without our awareness, they can also be consciously weakened and ultimately broken. This is where we apply the science. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's about reclaiming agency over our automatic responses, moving beyond merely reacting to our environment and instead becoming the intentional architects of our own behavior and emotional lives. Pavlov himself described the core physiological mechanism of how this happens, which he called internal inhibition. He observed that the positive conditioned stimulus itself, the very thing that once triggered a response could, under specific conditions, become inhibitory. Instead of evoking the usual excitation in the brain's cortex leading to the conditioned response, it would, through new learning, evoke a process of inhibition. This is the fundamental physiological basis of deconditioning. the brain actively learning to stop responding to a previously powerful cue.
So the brain learns not to react.
Precisely. He detailed how this process of extinction occurs. If a conditioned stimulus, like the bell, is presented repeatedly without the reinforcement of the unconditioned stimulus, the food, the conditioned response will eventually diminish and disappear. Pavlov noted the observable physiological effects of this process. For instance, in his experiments, the repetition of extinction, even when other conditioned stimuli were still being reinforced, consistently led to obvious drowsiness and even sleep in the animals.
Sleep, really?
Yes, sleep. This wasn't just a mental disengagement. It highlighted the significant physiological and neurological effort involved in weakening and breaking these deeply ingrained neural connections. It's not a passive process. The brain is actively working to suppress a learned response, and that takes energy.
It's quite remarkable how the brain physically reacts, even going into a state of drowsiness, when it's actively trying to unlearn something. It's almost like the brain needs to rest and recalibrate after putting in the work to override an old pattern.
hmm And Pavlov's work extended to more nuanced forms of inhibition, too. He showed how dogs could learn to differentiate between very similar tones, for example, a definite musical tone versus a tone very close to it that wasn't reinforced. This differentiation process, where the brain learns precisely when not to react to a similar but unreinforced stimulus, also induced drowsiness. It's not just about stopping a response altogether, but about fine-tuning it, becoming incredibly specific about when to respond and when to inhibit. This shows a sophisticated, selective kind of inhibition at play.
Okay, so the brain is pretty adaptable.
Absolutely. But, and this is important for setting realistic expectations, it wasn't always an easy or quick process. Pavlov's experiments revealed the incredible persistence of these connections, especially when they were deeply ingrained or formed through many, many repetitions. For instance, he documented a particularly challenging trace-conditioned reflex involving pairing a tone with acid. The tone would sound for 15 seconds, followed by a 30-second pause, then the acid was administered. This was repeated an astonishing number of times, almost 1,000 times over nearly 2 years.
1,000 times, wow.
Yeah. When they later tried to alter this by administering the acid simultaneously with the tone, the salivary response would still stubbornly delay itself for that original 20-25 seconds from the start of the tone. Even after many dozens of repetitions with the new simultaneous pairing, that initial latent period, that ingrained delay, persisted. This illustrates that deeply entrenched conditioning, especially when it involves such a significant number of repetitions, is extremely difficult to alter and requires persistent, repeated effort to shift. It's a testament to the brain's remarkable and sometimes stubborn ability to retain learned patterns, which means deconditioning requires patience and consistency.
Okay, so persistence is key. If our brain can indeed learn to stop responding, if it can actively inhibit those old signals, and we understand that it's a process that requires persistent effort, how do we intentionally apply this knowledge in our own lives? How do we take those profound insights from Pavlov's lab and use them to decondition our own triggers, those personal bells that might be ringing in unhelpful ways and leading us down paths we don't want to take?
This is where we shift from understanding the mechanism to actively engineering our environment and our internal landscape. One of the most practical and effective strategies comes from James Clear in Atomic Habits, and it's beautifully simple. The inversion of the first law of behavior change is make it invisible.
Make it invisible.
Right. Simply put, one of the most practical ways to eliminate a bad habit or to decondition a trigger is to reduce exposure to the cue that causes it. Think about it. If you're trying to cut back on late-night snacking, don't keep those tempting treats visible in your kitchen. Put them in an opaque container in a high cupboard, or better yet, don't buy them at all. If a particular app on your phone triggers a cascade of unproductive scrolling, move it off your home screen, deep into a folder, or maybe even delete it entirely. This is because, as Claire states, self-control is fundamentally a short-term strategy, not a long-term one. It's far, far easier to avoid temptation altogether by removing the cue than to rely on sheer willpower to resist it over and over again. Every time you have to exert willpower, you're draining a finite resource.
That makes sense. Avoid the battle altogether if you can.
Exactly. And beyond just hiding or removing cues, you can strategically create entirely new contexts. Clear notes that it is easier to build new habits in a new environment because you are not fighting against old cues. Imagine trying to break a habit of checking social media first thing in the morning while still lying in bed. That moment, is heavily conditioned. If you want to start a new morning routine, say meditating or reading, try doing it in a different room or immediately after getting out of bed, literally changing the physical context. The brain associates old cues with old behaviors, so a fresh start in a fresh setting can bypass those deeply worn neural pathways and allow new positive conditioning to take root without the baggage of the old bells.
That's a powerful insight because it reframes the challenge. Instead of blaming ourselves for a lack of willpower, we look to the environment. And this also involves a proactive approach to your environment, not just a reactive one. The 5 Psychological Truth Guide reinforces this brilliantly. Design your environment so the best choice is the easiest choice. This means actively removing friction for the good habits you want to cultivate and, critically, making cues for bad habits far less accessible.
Yeah.
For example, if your bell for procrastination is your messy workspace, design a clean, organized space that cues focus. If you want to exercise in the morning, lay out your workout clothes the night before, perhaps right next to your bed. That visual cue, with friction removed, makes the desired action almost automatic.
It's about making the good choice the easy choice.
The guide suggests a practical field drill to implement this. Pick a keystone habit you want to cultivate, like sleep, movement, planning, or reflection. Then, remove friction, lay out clothes, prep workspace, and add a cue. Same time, same place. By consistently pairing a desired action with a specific positive cue in an optimized environment, you're directly applying the principles of classical conditioning. You're deactivating old, undesirable triggers by making them harder to access, and simultaneously establishing new, beneficial ones by making the desired behavior the path of least resistance. It's about becoming an active designer of your own behavioral responses.
Absolutely. And beyond environmental design, a crucial aspect of deconditioning involves addressing our internal narrative and cognitive processes. Leon Festinger's theory of cognitive dissonance is highly relevant here. The main premise is that individuals strive for consistency in their beliefs, opinions, and behaviors. When there's an inconsistency, or dissonance, for instance, when your conscious intention to decondition a trigger clashes with your automatic conditioned response, it creates significant psychological discomfort.
That feeling when you know better, but do it anyway.
Exactly that feeling. This discomfort then motivates you to reduce that dissonance, either by changing your behavior, changing your belief, or adding new beliefs to kind of justify things. This drive for consistency profoundly influences how we process information. People tend to seek out information that aligns with their beliefs and actively avoid information that might increase their discomfort. This can make deconditioning challenging if, for instance, a trigger is tied to an existing self-perception like, I'm just someone who always gets stressed by deadlines, or a long-held belief that conflicts with the desired change. This craving is too strong for me to overcome. However, cognitive dissonance can also be harnessed as a powerful catalyst for opinion change, especially in face-to-face interactions. When people realize they hold conflicting opinions or behaviors, they are more likely to seek agreement, which can lead to a revision of beliefs. This means that having a supportive community, a social group, is a really valuable resource because it provides confirmation of beliefs and alternative cognitions. Knowing that others share your desire for change and are successfully deconditioning their own triggers can validate your efforts, reduce the internal conflict of letting go of old conditioned responses, and provide new models for behavior and belief.
That makes so much sense. It highlights that changing a deep-seated behavior can often feel like changing who you are, which naturally creates that internal conflict. And that ties directly into the concept of a growth mindset, which is incredibly empowering here. 5 Psychological Truth emphasizes that identity shapes destiny. You naturally act in ways that are congruent with who you believe yourself to be. If you've always identified as someone who just can't resist that particular snack, or someone who always gets anxious in social situations, that identity becomes a powerful self-fulfilling prophecy, reinforcing the conditioned response. Lasting change, then, requires identity-level updates, not just setting a goal. It's about shifting from, I want to stop doing X, to, I am the kind of person who doesn't do X, or even, I am a person who is learning to respond differently to X.
Right. It's a fundamental shift in self-perception. And this belief in your capacity for change is greatly influenced by how you interpret success and failure. Carol Dweck, a leading researcher on mindset, along with Angela Duckworth, highlights that praise should focus on efforts and achievements, not on innate personality attributes. If you're praised for your talent alone, you might develop a fixed mindset, fearing failure because it challenges your identity as talented. But if you're praised for your effort, your strategy, and the process of learning, it fosters a growth mindset, where setbacks become opportunities for growth and refinement. This is absolutely critical for deconditioning, as it encourages you to focus on the process of weakening triggers and cultivating new responses, rather than being discouraged by initial difficulties or relapses. It builds grit and resilience, which are essential for persistence in the face of long-standing conditioning, especially when those old patterns are stubborn.
It's fascinating how these psychological frameworks give us concrete tools for proactive change. Another powerful tool for deconditioning your triggers is strategic self-control, specifically through the use of pre-commitments. Dan Ariely, in Predictably Irrational, discusses how we often fail to reach long-term goals because we fall prey to immediate temptation, precisely what our conditioned triggers exploit. To overcome this, he suggests giving yourself an opportunity to commit up front to their preferred path of action. This acts as an external voice or a built-in barrier to guide your behavior, making it harder to revert to old conditioned responses. For instance, if your bell is the urge to scroll social media when you should be working, you might set a timed app blocker before you even start working. Or if you're trying to avoid a certain food trigger, you might pre-order a healthy meal at a restaurant, committing to the action before the temptation of the menu arises. It's about making the decision when you're in a rational state, rather than when you're triggered.
That's a clever way to bypass the immediate pull of a trigger, essentially installing an intentional speed bump in your conditioned response. Building on this, Albert Bandura's social learning theory introduces the concept of self-reinforcement. This makes behavior least susceptible to the vagaries of situational inducements when the main consequences are either intrinsically related to the behavior or are self-produced. Meaning, when you create your own rewards or positive consequences for not succumbing to a trigger or for engaging in the desired alternative behavior, it provides more favorable total consequences for advantageous actions. Instead of waiting for external validation, you actively create a powerful internal feedback loop that strengthens the new desired response. B.F. Skinner, another giant in behavioral science, also emphasized moving away from punishment and towards positive reinforcers, or what he called rewards for desired behavior. He noted that while slower than punishment, this method of behavioral change is significantly more powerful and lasting. The aim, as he put it, is to induce people not to be good, but to behave well. Instead of punishing yourself for giving into a trigger, which can often be counterproductive, focus on consistently rewarding yourself, even with small, immediate rewards, when you successfully avoid a trigger or choose an alternative action. This positive reinforcement gradually strengthens the new desired response, making it more automatic over time, effectively installing a new positive bell.
Okay, so reward the good, don't just fight the bad. So much of this is about managing our internal states, especially when those triggers hit. The 5 psychological truths offer specific, actionable protocols for emotional regulation that can be directly applied to managing the immediate impact of triggers, essentially interrupting that conditioned emotional cascade. For stress, which often signals a mismatch between demands and resources, the regulation protocol is to prioritize, sequence, and reduce input. They suggest using breath work plus a 10-minute focus sprint as an immediate intervention to bring your nervous system back into balance. A particularly practical tool they offer is the name, locate, breathe, act sequence. When a trigger causes a stress response, you can name the emotion, for example, I feel overwhelmed. Locate it in your body, e.g., tightness in my chest. Breathe into that sensation, creating space and calming your physiology, and then act thoughtfully rather than reacting automatically from a place of stress. It's a way to consciously insert a pause between your trigger and your conditioned response.
Exactly, it gives you that crucial moment of conscious intervention. Similarly, for anger, which often signals a perceived boundary violation or injustice, the recommended regulation protocol is to delay the first response. Instead of immediately lashing out, sending a fiery email, or reacting impulsively, you're encouraged to write the boundary you will state, then deliver it calmly. This protocol essentially uses a pre-commitment strategy for emotional regulation. Again, the name, locate, breathe, act sequence can be applied. Name the anger, locate it physically, breathe through it to create space, and then act with intention by calmly stating your boundary rather than letting the conditioned anger take over. These protocols are about interrupting the automatic conditioned emotional response and inserting a conscious, regulated choice, creating new, more adaptive pathways in the face of emotional triggers.
This also extends to how we navigate our relationships, particularly when dealing with attachment styles, as explored in Attached. You mentioned this earlier. People sometimes unconsciously employ what the authors call deactivating strategies to create distance and avoid intimacy, often as a conditioned response to perceived threats to their independence or fears of being overwhelmed. This can look like focusing on a partner's minor negative qualities, perhaps to justify pulling away, or even fixating on a phantom X to make any new partner seem insignificant by comparison. It's a subtle, often unconscious form of self-deconditioning from closeness triggers, a way to keep emotional vulnerability at bay, perhaps because intimacy has been associated with pain or abandonment in the past, leading to a conditioned fear response to connection.
But here's the incredibly hopeful and empowering part. Attachment styles, while often stable over time, are also plastic, meaning they can absolutely change.
They can change. That's huge.
It is. The research shows that security priming, which involved consciously recalling secure experiences you've had, even brief ones, or observing and being inspired by secure role models, can help you adopt more secure behaviors in the present. This effectively deconditions insecure responses. For instance, if you're someone with an anxious attachment style, consciously reminding yourself of moments where you felt truly safe and connected, or even just imagining how a securely attached person might navigate a similar relationship challenge, can gradually begin to rewrite your brain's conditioning around relationships. This allows you to respond from a place of security rather than reactive anxiety or avoidance when those familiar relational bells ring. It's a deliberate effort to create new, positive associations where old, insecure ones once dominated. This underscores that even our deepest relational patterns are not fixed fates, but are amenable to intentional reconditioning.
That's truly empowering to hear, because it shifts the narrative from being stuck with a label to having agency over our emotional wiring. Deconditioning isn't just about stopping something, is it? It's profoundly about making space, clearing the ground for something new, for something more beneficial to grow. It's not just about stopping the old, unwanted bell from ringing. It's about making space for new music, for new, more harmonious patterns in your life. So what does this all mean for building a truly fulfilling, self-directed life?
Well, once the power of problematic triggers is weakened, and we've cleared some of that old conditioning, the opportunity arises to intentionally redesign our environment and our internal systems to promote new, desirable behaviors and positive experiences. Skinner, in Beyond Freedom and Dignity, makes a powerful and somewhat provocative point. An experimental analysis shifts the determination of behavior from autonomous man to the environment, an environment responsible both for the evolution of the species and for the repertoire acquired by each member. While we are indeed profoundly controlled by our environment, he reminds us that it is an environment largely of our own making. He even posits that the evolution of a culture is a gigantic exercise in self-control. This perspective empowers us as individuals to consciously and ethically shape our personal environments rather than passively being shaped by them. We are not just subjects of conditioning, we can become the designers of our own conditioning.
We can design the environment that conditions us.
In a way, yes. In essence, deconditioning problematic triggers is a preparatory step, clearing the slate so that we can intentionally create new, positive conditioning. Albert Bandura's social learning theory highlights that new responses aren't just learned through direct experience. They can also be acquired by observing models and through self-discovery. Symbolic modeling, such as what we consume through media, books, or even the stories we tell ourselves, has tremendous multiplicative power to transmit new behaviors and beliefs to vast numbers of people. By consciously choosing what we expose ourselves to, whose behaviors we emulate, and what narratives we internalize, we can actively install new, beneficial patterns and responses. We become the curator of our own learning.
This shift isn't just about behavior. It touches on our deeper motivations and sense of purpose, doesn't it? Abraham Maslow, in Motivation and Personality, described how, for self-actualizing people, motivation moves beyond merely striving to fulfill basic needs like safety or belonging. Instead, it transforms into character growth, character expression, maturation, and development. Deconditioning yourself from negative triggers, then, becomes a crucial step toward these higher levels of personal development. It frees up immense mental and emotional energy that was once consumed by reactive patterns and the constant struggle against unwanted urges, allowing you to invest it in becoming more fully yourself, to grow in your own unique and authentic way.
And this journey of growth often involves embracing a larger purpose, finding meaning beyond immediate gratification. Ernest Becker, in The Denial of Death, argues that humans are driven not just by a fear of death, but by a profound need for heroic transcendence and the consecration of one's existence to higher meanings. Overcoming deeply ingrained fears, biases, and conditioned responses, and choosing instead to pursue a higher purpose or meaning in life, can fill the vacuum left by deconditioned negative behaviors. It's about replacing an unhelpful automatic response with a conscious, life-affirming dedication to something greater than oneself, imbuing life with intrinsic meaning that can override lesser urges.
Finding that bigger why.
Exactly. Ultimately, as Martin Seligman discusses in Flourish, deconditioning can open the door to actively cultivating positive health assets. He points to optimism, hope, zest, regular exercise, deep love, and meaningful friendship as vital assets that protect and strengthen the body. By understanding and actively dismantling the negative cycles perpetuated by our unhelpful triggers, we create the mental and emotional space to intentionally nurture these positive elements in our lives. It's a holistic approach to well-being, where understanding and changing our conditioned responses becomes a powerful pathway to a more flourishing, self-directed existence filled with purpose and vitality.
So today we've really seen how the simple ringing of Pavlov's bell echoes through nearly every aspect of your life,
Yeah.
subtly shaping everything from your daily habits and cravings to your deepest emotional responses and relational patterns. But the incredible liberating power lies in knowing that you, the individual, can learn to conduct that orchestra, to change the score. You don't have to be a slave to your conditioning.
Exactly. By understanding the fundamental mechanisms of classical conditioning, by diligently identifying your own unique personal bells or triggers, those specific cues that set off that chain reaction of desire or emotion, and by applying these evidence-based strategies from thoughtfully engineering your environment to engaging in cognitive reframing and seeking social support, you gain the profound agency to literally rewrite your brain's conditioning. Your attachment styles, for instance, are plastic, not fixed, and your ability to change your inner environment as much as your outer is truly profound. It's an ongoing process of self-discovery and intentional design. This raises an important question.
So as you go about your week, keep an ear out for your own personal bells. What are those subtle cues telling you to do, and is that really what you want? The next time you feel that automatic pull, that familiar urge or emotion, maybe just pause and ask yourself, can I change the environment around me right now to break this chain? Can I choose a different internal script or apply one of those emotional regulation protocols we talked about? Can I perhaps intentionally ring a new, more positive bell to create a different, more desired response? If our brains are constantly conditioning us based on our environment, and we largely create our own environment, well, what does that say about the ultimate responsibility for who we become? And maybe more practically, what new bells will you intentionally install this week? What positive cues will you put in place to shape your ideal future?